Now, Nigeria's rebased gross domestic product (GDP) shows that the economy grew by 3.13% in the first quarter of 2025. Newly released data from the National Bureau of Statistics says this figure reflects a more accurate measurement of Nigeria's economic activities using 2019 as the new base year. Muplang Dakok reports.
Rebased GDP shows a growth of 3.13% in 2025. It shows that Nigeria's economy expanded to 94.5 trillion naira. The National Bureau of Statistics says that the figure captures structural changes in the economy and improvements in data sources.
The growth rate for Q1 is 3.13%. It was 2.27 in Q1 of 2024. This was driven mainly by services sector. Services sector recorded 4.33% growth rate, and also services sector contributed 57.5%.
The non-oil sector grew by 3.1% in real terms. The trade sector grew by 9.13%. Accommodation and food services grew by 60.3%. Transportation and storage 53.56%. Information and communication sector grew by 31.63%, while the agriculture sector grew by 10.04%. On a whole, the rebased GDP provides a clearer picture of Nigeria's economic structure and performance. In Abuja, Muplang Dakok.
And on the program today, we turn our focus on Nigeria's newly revised gross domestic product figures, which now use 2019 as the base year. According to the National Bureau of Statistics, the rebased GDP shows that Nigeria's economy grew by 3.13% in the first quarter of 2025, with the services sector leading the charge, followed by agriculture and industries. Well, joining us to unpack the figures is Uche Uwaleke, Professor of Capital Markets, Nasarawa State University. He joins us via Zoom from Morocco. He will help us understand what has changed and why it matters. Thank you, Prof, for joining Business Express this morning. I hope you're having a good time in Morocco.
Thank you, Neka. It's indeed my pleasure. Good morning.
Great. Now, for starters, what exactly does GDP rebasing mean and why is it necessary?
Yeah, that's a good question and a good starting point. First, what is GDP all about? GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product, and it measures the total value of goods and services produced within an economy over a period of time. Of course, when you are looking at the one produced by nationals, regardless of whether they are here, you are talking about the gross national product. But this is the gross domestic product. So within the geographical enclave called Nigeria, the value of goods and services produced is what we call the gross domestic product. What is rebasing all about? Rebasing is about updating the data on GDP. It's about replacing the old base year with a new base year. Up till this moment, we have been using an old, base year. Remember, the last time we rebased GDP was in 2014. That 2014 exercise used 2010 as the base year. And before then, for over a period of nearly 20 years, we didn't rebase GDP. We were using the 1990, constant price as the base. So by 2014, we rebased up till using the 2010. So what we have done now is to also change the base year from 2010 to 2019. So the gap this time is, shorter, which is also why we are not having the massive impact we had during the 2014 rebasing. So rebasing essentially is about changing the base year, bringing the data up to date. By way of justification, why do we need to do that? Of course, over time, a lot of things change. Technology, you have experienced changes in technology. We experience changes in production. We experience even consumption, patterns. So all of this, have to be reflected in the new data for GDP. And again, there is also the need to benchmark international standards to have your numbers, in line with international standards. So this, for me, represent the justification for GDP rebasing. And I want to use this opportunity to commend the National Bureau of Statistics, for this effort, for not waiting for so long, to do this rebasing. Ideally, rebasing should be done every 5 years. Okay, and now although some countries do this every 10 years. So that we are doing it now, I think is the right thing to do.
All right. The new data shows a growth of 3.13% in the first quarter of 2025. Tell us, how does this compare with previous estimates?
Yes, of course, you know that if you look at the figures, the numbers, you hear of nominal GDP. Maybe I should have also touched on that, nominal GDP as opposed to real GDP. Nominal GDP is simply GDP at current market prices, reflecting the actual prices at which goods and services, were exchanged. Unlike the real GDP is when inflation has been taken into account, when the nominal GDP is adjusted for inflation. If, for example, the nominal GDP growth is, say, I just want to give an example, at 15%, and inflation is running at 10%, it means that real GDP growth is at 5%. So you knock out inflation to get real GDP. So the number that you just mentioned, 3.13%, is real GDP growth for the first quarter of 2025, which of course represents an improvement over what we had the corresponding period year on year. That's what it means. Year on year means corresponding period of 2024 at 2.7, just as you had the MBS CEO there mentioned. So it represents a modest improvement over that. And if you also look at the GDP rebasing, the outcome, okay, it's interesting to note that in terms of composition, again, we have witnessed a structural shift in the composition of the sectors. Before now, of course, the services sector has always been the leading sector. Before now, it was at 51%, but now the new GDP figure, has revealed that it has now grown to about 52%. The agri sector, again, was contributing about 22% to GDP. Today, by the new figure, it's now contributing 27%, to GDP. So what has become manifest that the agri sector has expanded. But sadly, the industry sector has, declined. Going by this new figure, industry declined from, it used to be 27%, and now we are looking at 21%, contribution to GDP. So these are the key findings, with respect to this, these new numbers, the GDP numbers. But overall, one can say that we have experienced, modest growth. What has clearly emerged is that the economy is bigger than was previously thought. 371 trillion naira nominal GDP. In dollar terms, that's about $250 billion if you use 1,500 naira exchange rate. Okay, before this time, it was thought to be a lot, smaller. So we have seen a leap, of about 42% in the size of GDP, unlike what, as opposed to what we were using before. So it's good that the numbers, have been updated. It's good for our planning purposes, and it's also good from the point of view of even international profile of Nigeria.
Now, Prof, some may argue that the GDP rebasing paints a better picture of the economy compared to what is on ground. How do you respond to such concerns?
Yes, that's correct. The concerns are, very, very valid. But there is a difference between GDP and other maybe economic other metrics. GDP simply measures how fast the size of the economy. and the growth rate measures how fast the economy is expanding. Okay, so it doesn't talk about the distribution. Now, one other way to look at GDP is to, because there are approaches to GDP. Okay, what we've been discussing is just one approach, the output approach to GDP. There's also the income approach, and there's also the expenditure, approach. If you take the income approach, for example, to look at GDP, okay, if GDP is growing, it also says income levels are growing, but it does not tell you the distribution of that income. Okay, so if the income is in the hands of a few, for example, you will still have a situation in which people will be saying the GDP is not reflecting on their lives. Okay, and that is why it's important that the quality of the growth, should also be of concern. Look at the data that has been released. As I said, services sector is powering the GDP growth. Okay, in terms of growth rate, over 4%. But look at the growth rate recorded in the as I said, the manufacturing sector, the industry sector, and the agri sector. Nothing compared to that of the services sector. So as long as we don't have strong growth in employment elastic sectors like agri sector, like industry sector, we'll continue to have issues about even complaints about unemployment. Unemployment rate will only reduce if GDP is growing and the quality of the growth is inclusive. Okay, if GDP is growing, for example, and it's only the oil sector that is powering it, or the financial services sector that is powering it, as how you now check, these sectors are not employing so many people. So even when they are growing, you still find a lot of people, without jobs. And that is why the attention really, should be on, and that's why the numbers are good. It's good we have these numbers, as I said, for planning purposes, so that government can now know the sectors to focus on. Okay, as I said, agri sector is a major driver if we want to talk about the lives of the ordinary Nigerian, because that is the sector that will now help to create jobs. The same with the industry sector, the manufacturing sector. Okay, there's a limit to which the services sector can create jobs. Talking about telecom sector, for example, there's a limit to which it can create jobs. Talking about the financial services sector, not a lot of people can work in those sectors. But given our population, our growing population, I think the real areas of focus for GDP growth rate to also reflect on the lives of Nigerians, I think the real focus should be on the agri and the manufacturing sectors. Because once
All
you put the
right.
enabling environment in place, you have power, for example, you have fixed insecurity. The services sector on its own, can be auto-driven, can drive on itself.
All right, Prof. The World Bank and IMF project Nigeria's GDP growth at 3.6% and 3.4% respectively for 2025. Now, with a first quarter growth at 3.13%, are we on track to meet these projections? And what
I think
reforms are
so.
needed to sustain or even surpass this trajectory? Very quickly, sir.
Yes, Nick, I think we're on track. 3.13%. If you look at the projections, I think we are likely to do that on the average by the end of the year. If you check the trajectory, even from the numbers released by the MBS, you notice that third quarter, fourth quarter, particularly fourth quarter of every year, if you look at the GDP growth rates, fourth quarter of every year, they have tended to be stronger than the GDP growth rate of earlier quarters, quarter one and quarter two. So if we use that as a yardstick, I want to expect that the GDP growth rate for quarter three and quarter four will be a lot stronger, such that we'll be able, on the average, to attain the 3.6% projections by, these international, international bodies. But of course, these growth rates are still small. If we must attain $1 trillion economy by 2030, okay, at nominal GDP of 300 to $50 billion, that means we need to quadruple that. And to quadruple that, this economy needs to grow at not less than 7% per annum on an annual basis, till 2030. So that's a huge task. And the major enabler for me, for us to attain that, will be, fixing the power. Okay, power is very crucial. Once we're able to get it right, in the power sector, and I'm happy the efforts have been made in that direction with respect to decentralization. Okay, once we're able to get power right, I'm sure that will turbocharge the economy, and we should be able to, even if we don't attain $1 trillion economy, we should be able to, do something close to that, by 2030.
All right. The key takeaway from this conversation is that it doesn't mean the economy is suddenly stronger. It only gives a clearer, updated picture of the economic performance. Thank you so very much, Prof, for your time this morning, and do have a great day over there in Morocco.
Thank you so much, Neka. My pleasure.
Right.